Hello. We're doing it on a different day this week. I was busy yesterday. I couldn't. I had a Zoom meeting I had to attend, so I couldn't make it for this. But just postponed it for a day. Got a few people in already, and we'll start on time at 6. There's Yankee Apple checking in. Miroslav, how you doing? Wow, glad you're here. Hello. Okay, we're getting a few more people checking in. Good. Just make a video on a world cycle. Yeah, I could consider doing that. Yeah, almost time to start. Maybe a couple more minutes. I don't like to start ahead of time in case somebody's waiting for 6 o'clock to jump in.
It's 6 o'clock.
Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Okay, so we're going to continue this week with our tour of the realms, and we're going to go right to the bottom this evening and talk about Niraya. Niraya is the worst possible rebirth, result of very bad karma. It could be, it often is translated as hell, hell realms. And I'd like to kind of avoid using um, terms from English terms that are derived from other religious systems because they have misleading connotations. I think this is particularly the case with the heaven realms or the sagas in Pali. But hell is actually not too bad a word for Niraya. It's different than the Christian hell in that it's not eternal. It's a place of rebirth, and in some cases, the being who's born into a hell existence might um, exist in that state for a very long time, up to a kappa, but it may be as short as a few days. There's no fixed length. It depends on the karma made by the person. It's a state of rebirth that is marked uh, very strongly by suffering of different kinds. And burning or boiling in molten copper are particularly mentioned, but also being stabbed or cut or attacked by various kind of ferocious animals, or being immersed in various kinds of filth. These are all aspects of Niraya. The karma that leads to Niraya is broadly, any very negative karma, but some things are particularly mentioned. One is that the Buddha said that Michaditti, a wrong view, leads to Niraya more surely than anything. And it's explained this is not just generally wrong view, but having the wrong view that there's no result of good and evil deeds, not holding some idea of karma or consequences of deeds. Because anyone who holds this view is likely to be very shameless and commit all kinds of wrong actions with the wrong idea that there's no karmic result of that. That if they can hide it, they can get away with it, then they're not going to suffer any consequence. There are also certain actions that are said to lead one to be born in Niraya for certain in your next birth if you commit one of these acts. And these are killing your mother or killing your father, killing an arahant, wounding a Buddha, or creating a schism in the Sangha. So some people have said that monks can go to hell more easily than lay people because a layperson can't possibly create a schism in the Sangha. It's technically defined as schism is when one group of monks refuses to do Patimokkha or other ceremony with another group, then they've split, and that's a schism. And the one who caused that has created very bad karma. Since in Buddhist history there's been numerous splits of different schools, it seems like this is not a rare thing, actually. So those are the 5 actions that are said to lead directly to Niraya. Location of Niraya is interesting because it's not clearly specified where in the Chakrawala, in the world system, Niraya is located, except that it's at the bottom, it's down below somehow. And we do have several stories of particularly egregious wrongdoers who, for whom the earth opened up and they fell directly down into Niraya. This happened with Devadatta, who was the one of the Buddha's disciples. He was a cousin of the Buddha, and he was one of his disciples who turned against him and tried to lead a rebellion against the Buddha to take over the Sangha. And he committed at least 2 of those offenses leading to Niraya. He wounded the Buddha when he was trying to kill the Buddha, and he created a schism in the Sangha. And it said that the earth opened up under his feet and he fell down. Flames emerged from the earth and he fell down directly into Niraya. It's also said, though, that after a very long time, I think it's 100,000 kappas, he will become a reborn human and become a Pachika Buddha. So this is an important point, that there's no eternal damnation in Buddhism. Now, for beings that fall into hell, they suffer there for a period of time according to their karma, and then they're reborn elsewhere. Often, people who have been reborn human after being in Niraya, they still have some suffering in the human realm from residual karma. People who have particularly miserable existence as humans can be just emerging from the hell realm. When we look at the heaven realms, there's a very clear delineated scheme of a hierarchy of the different heavens, and it's quite clear and unambiguous. There's 6 sensual heavens, and then there's the Brahma worlds, and it's all, the relationship between them is all clearly defined. We don't find this with Niraya. There are different texts that have different lists of hell realms, and we can find the commentaries occasionally making an effort to reconcile the lists and come up with a coherent scheme, but it always seems to fall short. We really don't have like a map of Niraya. The one that particularly stands out is Avicii, which is the also called Maha Niraya, or the Great Niraya, which is the most severe, it's the worst, it's the most intense suffering. The word Avicii means without remission, without gap. It's unrelenting suffering. It's a word that Avicii as a name of a hell is not found really in the canon. It's a commentarial term. In the canon, we have several references to Maha Niraya, the Great Niraya. In particular, there are two suttas in the Majjhima Nikaya, back-to-back suttas that talk in detail about the hell realm of Maha Niraya and describe it and the tortures that occur there. Maha Niraya itself, or Avicii, is a cube with iron walls that are always red hot. I think the most prevalent tradition is that it's 100 yojanas on a side, which is pretty big, but in the scale of the cosmos, it's not. It's actually quite small relatively. You know, Mount Sunaru is 84,000 yojanas high. So something that's a cube 100 yojanas on a side is pretty small relative to the big picture. Flames are continually shooting from the east wall and striking the west wall, and from the west wall striking the east wall, and from the floor to the ceiling, and so on. So it's entirely engulfed in this very intense flame. And the beings are packed in there, the suffering beings are packed in there as tightly as mustard seeds in a jar. As one of the sufferings there is being so totally cramped that you're constantly injuring your neighbors by moving around. It's said that there are more beings in Niraya than there are humans on Earth. And that's a kind of a general rule that it's much more common existence in the lower realms, and the higher realms are less populated. In the suttas I'm talking about in the Majjhima Nikaya, it describes how occasionally one of the doors will open in this hellish cube, and beings will try and escape, but they usually don't make it. The door slams shut before they can get out. But occasionally some of them make it out, but that only changes the nature of their suffering, because then they go through various other horrible places, particularly the Vetarani River, which is the river of hell. It's a river with caustic water. Caustic meaning it's a lie, it burns. And the beings are washed around in this caustic river, and there are fish in there with needle-like noses that attack them and stab them, and there are plants that have razor-like leaves that cut them, and so on. And after they floated around in the river, suffering in different ways for a very long time, one of the hell guards, the wardens from Niraya Pala, fishes them out with a big hook. And he'll say, "Are you hungry, my dear?" And the person's famished. Says, yes, I'm hungry. And then the hell guard forces the red hot iron ball down his throat and then throws him back into Maha Niraya. This brings up the question of the inhabitants of Niraya, which are of two categories. There's the Nirayaka Sata and the Nirayaka Pala. That is the beings who are the sufferers, those who are born into that state and are tortured in various ways, and then the ones doing the tortures, the Nirayaka Pala. Pala means like a guard or a warden. And there was a controversy in early Buddhism as to whether the Nirayaka Pala were real beings or whether they were some kind of illusion generated by the karma of the beings suffering in hell. And the Theravada came on down on the side to say that they were real beings. And the Sarvastivada and some other schools came down on the side that they were illusions. Which strikes me as kind of curious, that particular arrangement, because there was another controversy whether animals in the heaven realms, like the elephants and the horses and the birds that are spoken of, whether they are real animals or whether they are illusions. And the roles were reversed. The Theravada said they were illusions, and the Vastivada said they were real animals. But returning to the hell realm and the wardens, it's said that the position taken by the Theravada, who said they were real beings with their own karma, said that to be it's also a very unfortunate rebirth. It's a miserable existence. I mean, they're stuck in hell too. It's said that people who are like cruel prison guards or figures like that who abuse their authority and torment prisoners are going to be reborn as Niraya Pala. Sometimes the torments and punishments in Niraya have, as we saw with the ghost realm, similarly, the torments often have a specific reference. They're specific resultants of specific deeds done as a human. For example, there's one case that's mentioned is for adulterers. They commit sexual misconduct with other men's wives. They're forced to climb this tree that has needle-like thorns that tear their flesh, and they see the image of their lover at the top of the tree beckoning them, and they feel impelled to try and climb the tree, and they're torn to shreds doing so. Another one like that that's mentioned is a case of an abortionist. They're thrown into that Veterani River, and it says, just as they tore up the fetuses with knives, so their body is torn and shredded by the razor plants in the Veterani River. There's a particular mention of it's actually mentioned several times, is the copper cauldron hell. It's a particular existence where you're thrown into a giant cauldron filled with molten copper, and you sink to the bottom and you rise to the top over long periods of time. King Ajatasattu was reborn into that realm, and because before the end of his life he did take refuge in the Buddha, his time there is relatively short. He's only going to do one round of falling and rising, but each round takes many thousands of years. But as I said previously, the existence in Niraya is not always long. We do have the story of Queen Malika, who was King Pasenadi's wife. Very beloved. He was very sweet on her. And she lived a virtuous life, except she had one lapse. And the story is kind of, it's a little raunchy, and It also makes it a little bit humorous, and it makes Poro Pasanati look like quite the fool, the love-struck fool. But the story is that Queen Malika was bathing in the room in the palace where they have like the bathing area, and when she bent over to wash her feet, her dog, who was in there with her, mounted her and began having sexual relations with her, and she actually enjoyed that, so she let the dog continue. And Pasanadi happened to walk in to the outer room just at that time, and he saw through the window what was going on, and he became very irate when she came out. He said, "You've been misbehaving with that dog." And she cooked up this ridiculous story. She said, "No, I haven't. That window is a magic window. When you look through it, you see what you see all kinds of illusory things. Here, I'll prove it to you. You walk into there, and I'll tell you what I see." So he walks into the bathing room, and she says, "What are you doing? What are you doing, Pasanati? You're misbehaving with a goat." And that was enough to convince him that this was really a magic window. So for lying, for committing sexual relations with an animal, and for lying to her husband, she was reborn in Niraya. But because the rest of her life was virtuous, her karma was not that intense, and she only spent 7 days there, and then was reborn into Sita heaven. So it is possible to have a very short, highly unpleasant but short trip to Niraya, depending on your karma. There are also mention of other specific hell realms. There are 2 short suttas back to back in the Samyutta where they're parallel. The wording is very similar in both of them. In the first one, an actor asked the Buddha, he says, "We are told by the elders in the Actors Guild that die will be reborn in the laughing heaven and there to enjoy bliss for a long time." And the Buddha remained silent. And so the fellow asked him again a second time and a third time. And it's the general rule that if the Tathagata is asked a third time, he always answers. So the Buddha said, "No, you've been misled by the elders in your guild. Actually, because the actors are misleading people into delusion and lust and anger, they will be reborn in the laughing hell." You know, where the hell wardens are dressed up like actors from a comic performance, basically evil clowns, and they torture the people there. Then in the very next sutta, the Buddha is asked a similar question by a soldier. He says, "When our elders tell us that if we die in battle, we'll be reborn in the ever victorious heaven." And the Buddha again was silent until the third time, and then he said, "No, you'll be reborn in the ever conquered hell, where the being forced into constant battle and warfare and hacking at each other." It sounds sort of like the Buddha says that's a hellish existence. There's one particularly different hell. That's the Lokantara Niraya, the in-between the worlds hell. The world systems were seen as round and surrounded by an iron wall, and there's an infinite number of world systems spread out horizontally in a plane. And where three world systems come together, the gap in the walls between them forms a roughly triangular shape. And it's always dark there, and it's always cold there, because the sun and the moon orbit Mount Sinnaru at a lower level than the walls at the edge of the world system. So this place never sees sun or moon. It's always completely dark. And the beings that exist there, they crawl around like bats on the outer rim of the world systems. And one of the torments there, they're tormented by darkness, by cold, and by hunger, but also by loneliness, because they come to believe they're the only being in the universe. They've never encountered another being, and they just think that this is the whole universe, just me suffering in this miserable, dark, cold place. It happens at rare occasions, as for example, when the Buddha attained awakening, there's a brilliant light that fills the whole world system, including the interworld hells, and the beings there then have a brief moment when they can see, oh, there are other beings here. I'm not all alone. But their normal existence, they feel completely alone. The only time that they have any encounter with another one is always very brief and unfortunate. As they crawl around, sometimes they brush against each other. And they both think, oh, here is something to eat. And they struggle and they fall from the wall down into the caustic ocean that the world systems float on. And they're dissolved like lumps of flour. So this interworld hell is particularly special. It's different than the other ones. Interestingly, it's the only mention of a hell realm where the suffering is by cold in the Pali sources. In some other traditions, like in the Sarvastivada tradition, there's a list of 8 hot hells and 8 cold hells. And the suffering in the cold hells is by intense freezing cold. And this was something, of course, picked up by Tibetan Buddhism. I think it's something in part is a geographical, that I think for someone living in the Ganges Valley, it would be hard to imagine cold as being so intense as to be hellish suffering. But it's probably not too hard to imagine that at that. One other aspect of Niraya that deserves some attention is the role of Yama. There is a being called Yama who is the king of Niraya, and he's a very curious character, kind of ambiguous. The only detailed description of Yama is found in the one sutta in the Majjhima Nikaya, which describes how when beings are reborn into hell, their first encounter is with Yama, whose role comes across as very bureaucratic. He's the kind of the intake officer. And he doesn't come across as being unsympathetic. He's like trying to find a way to not throw the fellow into hell. He asks him, "Good sir, did you not in the course of your life, ever see a sick person? And did it not occur to you, I too could fall into sickness. I had better make good karma while I have opportunity. The fellow says, well, I did see sick people, but I never made that connection. Go through all the different permutations of birth, old age, death. And in the end, he says, oh, there's nothing can be done with you. Take him away. And the hell guards come and drag him away with hooks and start cutting him and beating him and throw him into the fiery pit right away. And it's said that Yama is unhappy in his position, and he longs to be reborn human and be able to learn the teachings of the Buddha. It's a curious character, this Yama. I saw a picture book made in I don't know if it was Chinese, so I don't know if it was made in China or in Taiwan or someplace. It was about kind of moral lessons of not misbehaving and going to hell. And the way they depicted hell was with the officers in hell was extremely bureaucratic. They were dressed like mandarins, in old China, the mandarins, and you see them walking around carrying books and sitting at desks with the scrolls open as they interrogate the incoming person. So there's this kind of feeling there of this kind of officious nature. Yama is not to be confused with the Yama heavens. The third heaven is Yama with a long A. Yama is short A. And there's no direct connection, although there is possibly a pre-Buddhist connection between the two. It may be that the name does have some significance in an older strata. In Vedic mythology, the original humans were twins, a boy and a girl, Yama and Yami, and they were like the Adam and Eve kind of figure. And Yama was the first human to live, and he was also the first human to die. So he became the Lord of Death, and his realm was situated in the third level of heaven, which is where the Yama heaven is in Buddhism. So he was the Lord of Death, like Yama, the Lord of Hell, who is sometimes in the Pali, is sometimes referred to as the Lord of Death as well. So there might be an old connection, and there is one reference in one verse when it's listing various deities. This is in the Pali, where it mentions the two Yamas. The only one instance where that's mentioned, Duve Yama, the two Yamas. So that could be a reference to the twins. So it is an odd kind of figure. And Yama's role is, he's not a judge, because one of the things he tells the incoming person is, your karma was made by you and you alone. It is not made by mother, not made by father, not made by devas or maras. You alone have made your karma, and you alone will experience the results. So he's not even got the capacity to make exceptions or show mercy. He's just officiously carrying out this role. Other than Yama, we don't have names of any of the hell wardens. They're not individualized characters. And we do get several stories of individuals who go to hell and their particular experiences there. There's one story that's kind of illustrative of some important points. There's a man who, this is a Jataka story. There's a man who's wants to go on a long sea voyage and see if he can make some money as a merchant. And his mother tries to dissuade him from going, and he goes angry with her, and he strikes her a blow and knocks her down. And then he leaves off to go to sea. And when they're at sea, the ship encounters a storm and sinks. And all hands are lost, but he manages to, clinging to some wreckage and paddling, he manages to come to an island where all the palaces, beautiful palace-like buildings are made of crystal, and there are 7 beautiful maidens there. And he stays and on this island, dwells with these maidens for a period of 7 days, and then they all turn into hideous yaka-like beings. They're Wamani-petis. They're those beings that experience the Dewa-like existence mixed with Peta misery. So he then goes from there back up to sea, and he comes to a second island. This time there's silver palaces and 14 maidens, and the same thing happens. And then third time with golden palaces and 21 maidens, and in a week they all turn into monsters. Finally he comes to a city on a large island, and he encounters a being there who's wearing a wreath of flowers on his head, and everything looks beautiful. And there's like a city in the distance, this Dewa-like city. And this fellow thinks, now is my chance. I'll take over the city and rule it as king. And he sees this fellow with this beautiful headdress and says, "You've worn that long enough. Give it here. Give it to me." And the fellow warns him. He says, "This is not a wreath of flowers, as it appears. It's a razor wheel." And he says, "You're lying. Give me that." And then the fellow says, "It must be that my karma is finished. It must be this man has struck down his mother as I did, and now I'm released from my suffering." And he gives the wreath to the guy, and it turns into a razor wheel, and he falls to his knees in agony, and he can't get the thing off his head, and he sees that it's actually, he's in hell. Everything's dark and fiery and miserable looking. So this illustrates the kind of karma-generated or mind-generated illusory nature of these kind of realms. That everything is sort of transformative. There's nothing fixed. He has this experience with these Ramani-petis that change their form, and then he finally ends up in what appears to be a beautiful place, and it turns into hell. So these experiences in these hell realms in general are karmically generated. So they're not at the same level of reality as in this realm, even though this realm also in the last analysis is karmically generated, but it's more obvious in hell. It's your own deeds that create the misery of the experience there. So I think I'll stop there, and we can go on to some questions. I am going to walk away from the screen for just like a minute, and I'll be back. So if you have any questions, type them into the chat. Oh, okay. I'm back. I had to check my door. There was some knocking at the door, but I think that they gave up on me. Could you discuss an antidote to apathy? Um, yeah, take an interest in whatever you're doing. If you can't get out of it, get into it. Try to find some interest in whatever your situation is, and try to do it the best you can. I heard a prophecy. Is there a prophecy that they would do to them, Pachika Buddha and Theravada? Yeah, there is. That it's in the commentaries, but it is in Theravada that Devadutta would become a Pachika Buddha. It's not only in the Mahayana. None of the places sound tourist friendly. I think I'll do my best to lead a good life. Yes, yeah, that's good thinking. Could hell realms exist here on Earth as a matter of one's perspective? Thinking of addiction, mental instability. Yeah, that's a. I think that's true. That in the to some degree, in the human realm, it's possible for us to have some experiences relating to any of the different realms. Some human beings live Dewa-like existence, and others live a ghost-like existence. And that would be particularly like drug addicts, and some have a very miserable, hellish existence. But these are only even the worst human existences, right? Is only a pale imitation of actual hell. Prison in a third world country sounds pretty hellish. Yeah, that would be pretty bad. If one has consciousness of death nears, how can one try to attain a virtuous life following death? Yes, one should try and recall virtuous deeds that one has done at the time of death. Um, the consciousness approaching death has a large effect on subsequent rebirth. It wouldn't work to live a completely heedless life and then at the very last minute think you're going to find a way out. Because you wouldn't have made the paramis and the mental capacity. During your life when you're healthy, you need to develop that virtues, and then at the time of death, you're going to be very, very helpless and weak, and um, unless you've got a strong foundation, you're not going to be able to do anything. So practical question from Ted: are the talks back to regular? Yes. Yeah, this was a one-time only because yesterday evening I had a Zoom meeting with other elders in our community, and um, I felt that was important to be there for that. So I just shifted this one time. Thursday is generally a better day for me. Is it possible to generate karma in the Niraya realms? No, not as a rule. It's the suffering is too intense. There's very little room to exercise free will. You just stay there until your karma runs out. Would a hell realm denizen have memory of their previous life? We just wake up in hell with no clue. Um, I think they do. Probably do would have memory in some cases. It's not like in the ghost realm and the heaven realm. There's many stories about beings recalling their previous life and their karma that led them there. I don't see those stories about the hell realms. Um, but it is a spontaneous, what's called a spontaneous birth, which means there's no birth process. You just appear there. You just wake up in that state. But it's probably so miserable that if you do have a memory, it would be shortly. You'd shortly forget it. The only realm to generate karma is a human realm and some Dewa realms. There's some limited karma could be made by animals. Human realm is the most opportune. In Dewa realms, it's also possible to make karma. I always thought most monks would obtain the Sotapanna stage. Why would you think that? There's no guarantee by becoming a monk that you're going to be a Sotapanna. Okay, so I think seems to be winding down. Unless there's anyone has a last question to bring up, we'll terminate this session. Okay, I'll take my leave then, and we'll come back next week at the old time, Thursday at 6. That's better for me generally. Okay, bye all.